Welcome to another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. My name is Bridget Burns. I'm the Executive Director of the University Innovation Alliance.
Hi, I'm Paul Fain. I'm a contributing editor with Inside Higher Ed.
And each week I partner with a journalist to have a conversation with a sitting college president, learn what it's like to navigate in these difficult times, to hopefully distill some wisdom, some insight and perspective that will help you be hopeful throughout the week. So this is Start the Week with Wisdom.
This week, we're excited to bring you a conversation with Dr. Kim Hunter-Reid, Commissioner of Higher Education for Louisiana. Dr. Hunter-Reid is definitely not a stranger to higher ed. She previously served as the Executive Director of the Colorado Department of Higher Education and was a Deputy Undersecretary at the U.S. Department of Education under the Obama administration. Hello, Dr. Hunter-Reid.
Hello, good to see you, Paul and Bridget. Thanks for having me on.
Well, let's start off with how you're holding up. As we discussed briefly just now, lots of things going on in Louisiana. So what's top of page today?
Well, unfortunately, we're watching the weather again. We've had two huge hurricanes hit our state, and we are in the cone of uncertainty for another potential storm late Wednesday, early Thursday. So, we are educating in a time of COVID, got racial unrest. We're trying to address those issues, and then we have multiple hurricanes on top of that.
Well, I guess that's what I would start asking about is, I hope things were a little easier in Colorado. I hope things were a little easier when you were at the U.S. Department of Ed. I know that you have been in a variety of really important roles that have dealt with crisis, but I feel like you might be in the center of the storm in a way that I don't think people understand. And I'm just wondering, what have you learned from navigating multiple crises simultaneously as a leader that you would share with us today?
So thank you for that question. It absolutely has been a challenge, and I appreciate you talking about being hopeful. So, when you walk through the storm, if you will, as we have in Louisiana with Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, two enormous storms, very disruptive, you get a sense of what the battle rhythm of the work is, how to focus on recovery, how to think about triaging what you need immediately, and then how to build it back better. And so we take that mindset and that ability we have to really work in emergencies, because it's what we do in Louisiana, and you apply that to a 2020 that is unlike any other, right? So we have the pandemic, racial unrest, multiple hurricanes, and yet at the center of the work, we still are committed to making sure that more people have access to education and training than ever before. We know that people who are more educated are healthier, are less likely to be laid off and more likely to be recession-proof. So our work is more important than ever, but it's also important to check on others. I started my staff meeting this morning asking, how are people doing? Personal check-in. It's important to understand that there are people who are weary and who need support, people who are homeschooling their children plus trying to get work done. So there is a lot going on. I think all across this nation, people are just trying to do the very best they can. And we are committed to the work, but I think we have to be committed to the people as well, and passionate and lead with grace and understand what's happening with the individuals who are doing such great work in such challenging times.
So I know that a lot of folks in your hometown and around the state feel that the national attention has been lacking amid such devastating hurricane challenges in such quick succession. Can you talk a little bit about the need for federal resources as we continue to await what's going to happen with a stimulus package in Louisiana?
Sure. So we have two institutions, McNeese, a four-year institution, Sewella, our community technical college, that have been impacted in my hometown of Lake Charles. Physical buildings, roofs off, significant damage, water damage, et cetera. And so anytime you have a storm, obviously you need support, FEMA, federal resources to address the gap between insurance and what's not insured, to support students who need assistance, to make sure that education and training can continue. So we certainly hope And we're working hard to make sure that Lake Charles and Southwest Louisiana, an area that had 2 major hurricanes in 6 weeks, receives the attention and the resources and the support that it will need to stand up a recovery that will be very challenging. We were already in a COVID environment, and so the bright spot of that is that we had some significant remote learning happening already. So we have a campus on our campuses on our in our state that are 100% remote, not because of COVID, but because of multiple hurricanes. So we try to flex into the resources that we have. We try to make sure we can clearly articulate the needs. But this is, as I said, a year like no other. So you have federal resources that we will need for hurricane recovery, ongoing federal resources because of the COVID environment. And of course, we look to other states. Colorado has significant fires, California. So there's a lot going on across the country. Many, many people who need more help, more resources than ever before.
Oh, I think you're muted there, Bridget.
So what I'm curious about is you have a long and distinguished career of serving and caring a lot about low income and first generation and students of color. And so what I'm wondering is, as we're navigating the pandemic and you're navigating all these other complexities, how can we try and make sure we don't further lose ground on equity gaps and serving those communities that, frankly, in good times, we weren't doing that great of a job. And now with things being as hard as they are, I'm just wondering if there's any insights you have about things that we can do to try and hold the ground.
It's a very good point. And I think intentionality in terms of looking at our data is critical. So when we look at and we talk with the economists about what's happened in a COVID economy, a shuttered economy, we see that women and minorities are more impacted than anyone else. That is a significant challenge. When we look at educational attainment in Louisiana, a place where 1 in 5 people were in poverty pre-COVID, we know that we have one of the lowest educational attainment rates for African Americans in the country. And so pre-COVID, as you mentioned, Bridget, we were not doing well by all of our citizens in our state. And then along comes, the hurricanes and the pandemic, et cetera. So I think we have to ask the question, how are we doing in terms of ensuring there's more access and that we're not exacerbating gaps? The first thing, obviously, is digital inclusion. If you're going to go 100% remote, then you obviously are making an assumption that everyone can go remote. So do all our students have access to technology? Do all of our students have access to a laptop or, the broadband that they will need? No, everyone does not. And so what do we do about that? We have been giving out laptops, trying to make sure we understand the resources that are needed. The governor's provided emergency funds, CARES Act dollars have been shared to try to address those gaps, and we're monitoring that along the way. We wanted to find out how many students dropped out in the spring when we went to remote learning in 2 weeks. And so we had to look at that information, not just for all students, but by subgroups. How are we doing with minority low-income students? And then trying to provide resources to them. So I do think that we have to be intentional and focused and committed to make sure that the solutions that we are providing, that we are not just providing those because we know this is good policy, but that we're asking questions to find out who is not doing well and how do we make sure that more of our students are availing themselves than ever before. In a knowledge economy, we need more than ever before in terms of education and training. We know that when we think about essential workers, frontline workers, service industry in New Orleans and other places that depend on tourism, that means minority and low-income students are going to be, or individuals are going to be significantly impacted. So we have $10 million in funds from the governor, from emergency funds, to try to stand up short-term high-impact credentials. High wage credentials across the state. And I think many states are doing that, trying to bring resources to bear, targeted solutions to help our citizens and to try to make sure we're narrowing and not expanding gaps that already exist.
Well, just to follow up on that, I'm sure you've seen.
Your audio is super weird, Paul. So you might want to. I don't know if you need to pull the plug on the headphones.
All right. Well,
no,
better now? Yep. Yeah, great. Okay. Sorry about that. It's Monday. So I'm sure that the equity gaps are pretty severe in terms of the impact of the pandemic across Louisiana. I'm really intrigued by the idea of creating short-term credentials for folks who've been displaced in particular industries. Can you talk about a little bit, how you know which programs can actually lead to jobs amid so much uncertainty? I know that's one of the big barriers for folks. How do I stick with this when I really don't know what's going to happen on the other side? What sort of job will be available to me?
So we did have it's a great question. We did, and as you know, in a shuttered economy, the occupational forecast is no longer relevant. So we had a conversation with all of the regional economic developers to ask them to identify their top 3 needs in terms of credentials that had jobs on the other end right away. So that allowed us, Paul, to have a targeted list for every region of the state, with more certainty than not, than if you participated in this 8 or 12-week program, that there's a job at the other side of it. And so that's the work that has happened to try to make sure we had real-time information in order to target that $10 million in a way that was helpful and intentional and smart. And so we're very excited about thousands of inquiries and hundreds of graduates or completers that have already participated in the program. It's called Reboot Louisiana. The community technical college system is heavily engaged. LSU and Southern also have 2-year institutions, and they're participating as well. We just have to do everything we can to support our own citizens and making sure that displaced workers have a path forward and one that will lead to a job at the end.
That's super helpful and a big challenge for many states. Is my audio weird for you? I feel like I'm okay. I'm super curious about what, as a commissioner, you're not on a campus. It's like you have power and influence, and you have to decide which ones you want to use. How do you equip the campuses to move quickly, to respond to needs, when in this virtual environment, and bring all the constituencies to the table as well? That seems like a real tension that I don't think anyone has stuck the landing on. And no, I don't assume that you got it perfect, but what advice would you give pre-COVID Kim in terms of that issue, now that you've learned of how you can figure out how to bring consensus and bring folks to the table while enabling quick decision making?
I would say that it's important to add value. Think about what you can bring to the table that will help leaders that are in the storm, literally sometimes in the storm and battling and trying to move forward. So a couple of examples. Obviously, our state, like all the others, are convening educational leaders around COVID to make sure we had good state plans. We convened public, private, 2-year, 4-year, and proprietary schools with our Office of Public Health to walk through cleaning and health protocols to make sure everyone had good information. Last week, we had another all higher ed COVID meeting to talk about waste treatment research that's happening in a couple of institutions. Could we bring it to scale to all of the institutions? What about testing protocols? What about student health ambassadors? So various campuses were able to share. There was lots of conversation in the chat, and resources are going to other campuses that perhaps needed that information and didn't know where to get it. We are convening the Office of Facility Planning and all of the leaders that are needed to bring McNeese and Sewella, 2 of our hurricane impacted institutions, back online as quickly as possible. So we're focused on rapid recovery. So I would say, we don't convene just to convene. We try to make sure we find a sweet spot where we can make a difference, where we can add value, where we can help institutions to get access to resources and to information that will allow them to make more informed decisions that keep their students safe and their campuses safe as well. The other thing that's unique about the Board of Regents is that we house the Council of Student Body Presidents. And so we have access to quarterly conversations with SGA presidents that are non-traditional and traditional, from rural communities, urban communities. And so having those conversations, they met on Saturday to talk about testing, to talk about service, and a number of other things. Having access to those student leaders to ask them, how are you doing? How can we support you? Also has been immensely helpful in making sure that we're doing a good job and that our job is evolving and getting better because we're hearing directly from students.
You know, when you're dealing with the challenges that you're dealing with, I know that college leaders and folks in roles like yours tend to be positive to help encourage folks to stay the course. How do you strike the right balance right now? Where, obviously I'm thinking about your meeting with this SGA leaders on Saturday. People are hurting, they're nervous, they're upset. How do you kind of thread the needle of being positive without, I've had some students talk about toxic positivity, this concern that, just be resilient and you'll get through this isn't really necessarily always the right thing to say.
So I do think the right thing to say is the question to ask is, how are you doing? How can we support you? What more do you need? And that's for our student leaders as well as our campus leaders. You're absolutely right. People are exhausted. They're storm weary, COVID weary, and they're trying to lead by example. So they're trying to put on that smile and showing that they are resilient and moving forward. But someone has to ask the question of the leaders, how are you doing? And what can we do to support you? And so I do think it is important. And I've talked with our students about their mental health issues. How do we support that? We've shared mental health resources across all of our campuses. I text my presidents, I call my presidents. I just say, hey, I'm here if you need something, let me know. I just think, as a state, we are known as a place where we look out for each other. Now more than ever, we really do have to look out for each other. These are very tough times.
So I'm going to take a step back and ask more of a broader question. You've had one of the most impressive careers in higher education that really has spanned responsibility and role and location and just all the topics you cover. I am curious, aside from the one you have now, which one taught you the most prior to this?
I think two positions probably I would have to say. The U.S. Department of Ed, obviously I learned a lot because you're just the scope and the scale of federal work is like no other. And so you get to be on the front line of many conversations, many policy discussions that can have tremendous impact. And having experience, which is my other observation of being on a campus, being a faculty member, I think makes my policy making so much better because I have that lived experience. So I think the bookends of, other than this great job, having that federal experience, but also coming to those conversations with state experience, institution experience, makes a real difference in terms of trying to understand intended and unintended consequences and how to really move work at scale. And I think that's been a challenge for us in this country. We have incremental change, pockets of excellence, but we have not figured out as a country how to scale what works. I know the Innovation Alliance is really working on that at scale for a number of institutions and showing the way. We see co-requisite math work that's happening, and we're part of that movement. But it's just sort of pockets of examples as opposed to saying, okay, this is how we should do it and everyone should adopt it. I think about, being in a pandemic and talking to a medical doctor, a friend of mine, talking about, best practices and what they know about treating disease. And once they figure out some information that works, they adopt it at scale, right, in the medical profession. And they continue to iterate and learn from that. And so the question is the same for us in education. Once we know what works, what will it take for us to adopt it at scale and then continue to innovate as we move forward? I think that's an important conversation for us.
Obviously nobody would choose to be in the period we're in right now, but it has helped, I think, to expose the depth of the problems as what they are. It's given us some clarity, I think, at least. Anything that you'd like to see that we're experiencing now that you hope sticks around? Any of the changes that have moved a little quicker than they might have that you hope that are promising?
So the first thing I would say is customized learning. I remember having a conversation with presidents, and one of the community college presidents said, we're saying to our students, however you want it, that's how you're going to get it. If you want it 100% online, 100% in person, hybrid. So who would think that we would turn the battleship in 2 weeks to 100% remote? And who would think that you would have a group of leaders saying, however the students need it, that's what we're going to do. So if we could get to a place of customized, personalized learning that is affordable and that is helps to move credentials of value forward to more people, more access to opportunity, I would say that's something that I would love to see us continue to have as a norm and not an exception because we're an emergency.
I want to take you back to the broad view. You've also learned quite a bit, both from working with fantastic leaders, being a fantastic leader, experiencing all kinds of ecosystems, and leading in different contexts. And I'm wondering if there are any particular leadership lessons from your past or your background that are really serving you right now as you try and lead in this difficult moment.
So, we think about necessity is the mother of invention, right? And I mean, I always think about, you hear people say a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. So, as soon as we jumped into this pandemic, we immediately grabbed our Katrina Rita files to look to see what were the lessons learned. What did we do? Have we missed anything? What do we need to be thinking about? So I think those things are, those lived experiences help. One of the things that I think is an important lesson learned for us, and we've already implemented here, day one of COVID, we assigned a senior staff person to do the after action report for COVID. So all along the way, we've been capturing the challenges and the lessons learned to try to move forward. And so a lot of times you get through an entire crisis, you take a deep breath, and then you start trying to capture what were the lessons and what did we do. But doing it at the same time in real time, I think has been very helpful. We've obviously been through a lot of challenges, and we have seen improvements, intentional improvements when we focus on that, when we focus on who's not doing well, when we focus on how the system can get better. And so I think those are the things that have to continue to be top of mind for us as we move this work forward.
So as you look forward, got that election coming up next week, lots of things going on in coming weeks and months. What gives you optimism? What gives you hope looking forward? What would you tell folks out there to kind of keep their eyes on the goals?
So, what gives me energy is the level of commitment that I see for people who are doing this work. As you started this program, talking about giving people hope as they start the week. I'm grateful for the number of educators who are committed to making sure that students have what they need, that they're asking students, how are you doing? That they're committed to showing up, learning virtual environments, getting better at virtual or remote education so that their students get the best that they can have for them. So I'm grateful for all of the educators who are on the front lines doing this work. And of course, I'm hopeful because I talk to students often who care about what's happening on their campuses, who care about what's happening with each other. I see students that are doing service projects to help the Lake Charles area, to help those institutions that are housing other students. I see students who are looking to make sure that their leadership, their voice is being heard, that they're sensitive to what's happening to students who are struggling, that they're a voice for students who don't have a voice, that they're providing their agency, leaning into their agency around peaceful protest to say, we are going to be part of the change that's going to make a difference. So, I think that's exciting. Anytime we've had significant change in this country, students have led the way. As we think about our great John Lewis and all that he has done, and what will happen with the next group of students. And so I'm excited about seeing young people using their voice for change. And I'm grateful for educators who are helping them to understand how to use their voice in a positive way.
I think that's the perfect, and it's the perfect tone to end our conversation today. So I just want to say that it's been such a pleasure to know you and watch you work in your career throughout the years. So for folks at home, I can't be fully neutral or unbiased in this conversation. I've known Dr. Hunter Reed since back when we were both associates in the National Center for Public Policy and Higher Ed, their associates program. And we still talk about how incredibly valuable investments like that were by smart funders to try and create pipelines for folks who might want to in the future show up in spaces like you do, and to have good friends and troublemaking allies like myself and many others come with you. So it's just been so delightful, and I just love how much you always try and make things better, and you always show up with your values front and center, focused on students. So it's just such a pleasure, and Louisiana is lucky to have you.
Thank you so much. We were the best class, right, Bridget? The last class and the best class. So thank you. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate you and Paul bringing this resource that we need. We need to make sure we're supporting each other, and you're making sure we have that avenue. And so I'm grateful to both of you as well.
Oh, well, thank you. And Paul, as always, you're an excellent co-host and a partner in crime. For folks at home, we appreciate you watching and sending in your questions and comments. And next week, we will have President Chris Howard from Robert Morris University. Same time, same place. So thanks so much. And we hope that you have gotten a little bit of inspiration to give you that final boost for the week. So thanks again, and have a great week.